All right, so let's take off here telling or talking about the data that will tell the story. So if you'll click on the next slide, I want to talk about this slide. So I listened to a podcast the other day about storytelling. It was a man by the name of Carmine Gallo. He's a famous communication coach, and he's also the author of The Storyteller's Secret and Talk Like Ted. I think I want to read that Talk Like Ted book. But he was talking about people using PowerPoint presentations to share information. And of course, I instantly went to this presentation because I was actively working on it and adding my bulleted list. But one thing that he said really resonated with me. He said, the human brain is wired for story, not for bullet points on a slide. So I've heard that before, and I know how powerful storytelling can be, but he went on to say that storytelling is the secret to communicating the most complex information. And that really clicked with me in regards to this specific topic, because I really feel like having conversations and understanding student growth and talking about student growth, I feel like it's a very complex topic. So, or at least it is to me. But when I looked at this slide that I was going to talk about, I thought, this is the perfect tool for storytelling. It's like the ultimate storytelling tool for student growth and teacher performance. Each one of these dots that we're looking at is a story of a teacher and students. It doesn't give you the answer to the story, but it'll show you where you can possibly ask questions, might tell you the questions, or it'll guide you through so you can kind of build your own stories. So I think back to the time when we first showed this scatter plot or something similar, and we had Jeremy Wagner as our guest speaker. At that time, he was still in a district. Thankfully, he's on our team now, so we're super excited to have him with us. But he went on to kind of point out a couple of points here of how he used this to tell stories, right? So the first is there's a dot in the top left-hand corner, the 4.5. So the teacher has this really high rating, and the student growth score is 0. So looking at this graph, he's like, wait, what is going on here? So he did some digging, investigating, and found out, well, the teacher had incorrectly scanned in some scores and thought that the scores were there, but they weren't. So that was a slight mistake, but this graph helped him identify that. And so he was able to come to some conclusions about it. There was another example that he shared with a dot in the bottom right-hand corner where the students had really high growth rate at 90%, but the teacher was way low. And so he goes on to tell the story of how this teacher that he, did some digging, found out that the teacher was young, first-year teacher, just initiated into T-tests, and they had gone, I guess they did the observation a little early, and so they did some coaching and they went back and did another observation. But I mean, it just thinking through how you can dig deeper into these dots and find that story that you can have those conversations with. So each dot that you click on, it can take you to some additional information. So click on the next slide and I'll show you. It'll give you a summary, and it'll give you kind of each of the scores, right? So we're looking on the left of domain 2 and 3. So we have the average, and these are very, very high scores. And you see that the students, there's 77% of the students did not grow. So this is definitely something that I want to dig into, right? So in this same view, you can click and go into the document, and you could look at what's going on here. Let me look at the comments. Let me look at the evidence presented. You might want to look at what students are in that list. So again, this tool allows you to really just dig and find those stories, so then you can have those conversations. So I thought that was really powerful, and a powerful tool. But the one thing that has to be in place is you've got to make sure that the data that you're putting into this tool is all there, right? So there are some key moments that you need to make sure you have in place throughout the year, throughout the system, all right? And the first one is setting growth targets. So this is something that has really, like, we've been working with the TEA on the teacher incentive allotment. And this one is really kind of stood out to me because it is very true. We're asking teachers to set, we're asking teachers to say how students grew, give a number to this. We need to make sure teachers know how to set those growth targets. You know, so the TEA has offered, and they have some growth models that they have where you can plug the data in and add the numbers in there. But really talking through how to set growth targets. What does it look like when a student has met expected growth? And you're looking at individual students. So this is really, really important, these conversations to have, and making sure that you're looking at multiple data points and a lot of evidence. So making sure teachers understand how to set those growth targets is huge, right? The next one is making sure that we're setting measurable goals, the SMART goals. Are teachers setting those measurable goals? Because if they're not setting measurable goals or attainable goals, then that's going to be a huge struggle for them as well. So we need to make sure that that's happening. The next one is making sure that we've got the reliability of the appraisal process. We want to make sure that our appraisers are aligned on the rubric. We want to make sure that they're able to do calibration walks, that they're aligned on vocabulary, like all means all. And so the littlest vocabulary change of not understanding makes a big difference. So that's a huge thing. And then the last thing is really kind of like a clerical detail, but this is huge when it comes to that first slide that I showed you with the scatter plot. In Strive, you have the option when you set up your summative, you have the option to add student growth percentages to your summative document. So what that means is in your summative document, there's a setting under the template options where you can click the checkbox there that says collect student growth percentages. And that gives the appraiser the ability at the end of the year to add those percentages in those student growth scores. So we do have a feature in the student portfolios. So if you're using the portfolios, you might be using them for SLO, you might be using them for portfolio, you might be using them for a pre and post test, because we have the ability. So if you're using portfolios to capture that information, at the end of the year, the teacher has the ability to choose student didn't grow, expected growth, or exceeded growth. Now, the way hopefully by next spring, our plan is to make sure that there is an ability for the appraiser to just import that information. So if you have that, if your teachers are using those portfolios, then that information can automatically be generated. So this is really key when it comes to that scatter plot graph, because this is where we're pulling the data from. We're pulling it from that summative at the end of the year with the student growth scores. And that allows us to look at that information in that one place. So this is, again, minor detail, but very, very important. All right. So the next thing, Paige is actually going to share a little bit more details with you of how to design your system. So I'll pass it to Paige.
All right. Thank you. So we do need to talk about some of the setup things. If you're going to make all of this happen, we want to get all of the information out of there. What can we do to make it easier and to get what we need to get? So one of the first things to consider, we're going to be talking about a lot of considerations, not necessarily that everybody has to do all of these things, but things that you might want to consider when you're looking at your setup. In order to get that student teacher correlation data that Shanna was showing you in the scatter plot, we need to have the teachers and the students evaluated in the same subject area and grade level. So you can kind of help the teachers help you in your training if you guide them to include the subject area and grade level of their student growth goal in the beginning of that goal statement. That will make it easier for you to find. So on the left, there's an example of a goal statement there that says Kinder ELAR. So I know what grade level and subject area this goal is going to be about without having to dig through and find all the details or look at the standards or anything like that. That's going to make it a little bit easier on you as an evaluator. And then when you go in to do any of those documents, you're going to want to select that same class period or time frame or whatever, making sure that you're evaluating that teacher in the subject area and grade level of their student growth goal. Now, for the walkthroughs, you may have some that are in that subject area and grade level and some that are not. But when you do your observation, your formal observation, and when you collect your summative data, you need to be focused on that same subject area and grade level as the student growth goal so that that data is correlated. That I'm looking at how the teacher did instruction in that same area that I'm measuring my students. So one of the things that's helpful to you is to have them include that in the goal statement. Makes it more easily identifiable for the appraisers. Then next, you might want to consider the rationale for that student growth goal. So why is this the student growth goal that the teacher chose? What is the reason behind it? And a lot of districts are writing rationales for their student growth goals, and they've been asking us, how do I include that when I'm using Strive? So one way to do that is to include it in the statement itself. Same goal that we saw before, but the part I have highlighted in this example is the rationale statement instead of the subject area and grade level. So each one of these goals starts with the rationale for that goal and then what the goal is. We also have a place for success criteria that's separate from the goal statement. And so they can put some of the measurement pieces in the success criteria and use the goal statement section for the rationale and the goal itself. So what is it that I'm wanting students to be able to do, and why am I wanting them to be able to do that becomes the goal statement, and then the success criteria is the measurement part. But for any of your goals, and I've given a secondary and an elementary example here, you can write a rationale statement that becomes part of that goal statement. Okay, another thing to consider is your professional development plan. Teachers have in all of their goals, professional goals and student growth goals, they have a place to add action items. And those action items are the perfect place for the professional development plan. That's usually what, when I'm writing a goal, the first thing I think about is what do I need to learn before I can do this? So it's the perfect place to put those professional development steps and to include them as part of the goal itself. The first screenshot over on the left shows you when they're building the goal. The step number 4 in the little wizard is where they can start putting in action items. It tells you there that the date is optional, and it'll also say that the screenshot on the right is what it looks like when they've actually started or they've created their goal and they're continuing to add, they can add action items. It will always tell you that the date is optional, and that is true. But if they include the date, it does two things. One, it puts the date here. So whenever I'm looking at my goal, I can see what did I plan to have done? When did I have it planned to be due? So it kind of keeps me on track a little bit, because when I'm looking at my goal statement, I can see those dates. But for me, the more visual item is when, before I even open my goal statement, when I'm just looking at my evaluation process and I'm seeing the steps listed out there, if I include a date for an action item, it will put one of these little maroon tick marks on the timeline. And the dotted line is the where are you now? It's kind of like the map in the mall. So that's where I am on the timeline. I am getting very close to my first action item. When I open it up, I can see that that action item is to attend a district offered training on the 21st. Hopefully I'm already registered for that and gonna go because I'm coming up on that deadline. But these little tick marks are great visual clues for me to see my dotted line is getting close to one of those. I need to make sure that I'm on track with it. I don't have those tick marks if I don't add the dates in. So they're optional, but they do give you a little added value if you put them in there. Again, the action items can be about anything that the teacher is going to do as part of this goal, but it is a great place to put the professional development pieces in there, and they are building a professional development plan through the actions. All right, another thing to consider is evidence. So teachers should be reflecting on their goal work as they go through the process. So once I have done some of those things, I'm going to come back and reflect on them. I'm going to add that evidence in, showing that I did what I said I was going to do. I have 4 choices for collecting evidence and adding that evidence to my goal. I can use a text box just to type in anecdotal evidence. I can attach a document. So I could attach an example of a lesson plan or a data sheet that I have, a quick view that I've exported and saved, and I want to include that data in my evidence. I can also link. So if I have something on my teacher webpage or something that's posted somewhere that I want to share, I can put that link in there. Or I can include a portfolio entry from the workshop side of Strive. So any courses that I've taken in my district or that I submitted as outside credit requests, I took them at the service center or wherever and got a credit that way, they will be in this little drop down menu for me to select the course that I want to talk about here. So I've selected that course, and then I have a box that says description. I wish it said description / reflection, because that's really what teachers should be using it for. So they can explain what it is that they attached, why it's relevant to their goal, what they learned from it, what they would do differently, any reflections that they might have on that experience of action and collection of evidence. So it's a great place for them to do their reflections and use it for more than just an attachment. It's actually a place for them to put some thought into it. All right, another thing to consider is those targets, those growth targets that Shanna was talking about. If you are using our portfolio feature, every item that you enter, whether it's a rubric or an assessment milestone, so it could be a rubric-based milestone like the SLO process with the initial skill profile and the target skill profile, or it could be an assessment milestone, which is what I've used in this example, where I have a test and the scores for that from that assessment are in my portfolio. For each one of those elements, I'm going to have a comments box. You can kind of see peeking out at the bottom below the comment that's open that they have a plus sign there if I haven't added a comment yet. So I can see if the plus sign lets me add a comment. If I already have a comment in there, it's going to look like this with the little lines so that I can tell who I've added them into. But if you are using one of the student growth methods that does give you the targets at the beginning, and not all of them do, but if you're using one of the ones that has a target at the beginning, then you could enter that target in the comment. And so that's a good place for you to include that information. The teachers can be thinking about their individual students and the individual targets for each student and entering them in after that first milestone, whatever it happens to be. All right. That was all of our considers right now. So Tara, do you want to go through the next?
Yeah, so Paige, thanks for, setting the stage for us, giving us lots of different situations for to consider. These are all things that you can bring into your own practice, and hopefully you've seen some creative ways that you can incorporate those into Strive so you have evidence of what you are doing and the conversations you're having. So Paige just shared with us five different scenarios and how they can be represented within your Strive setup. So I'd love to hear which of these are you ready to start now, or maybe you're already doing. So you're already making sure that grade subject area is part of being intentional about going and doing your observations aligned to where teachers have set their student growth goals. Or B, maybe you're ready to now add rationale to a student growth goal. So we did hear in the chat from a district that is doing this in the action steps instead of in the top part of where they're creating the goal. So that's great to hear. There's multiple ways we can represent this. Maybe the next step you're ready to take is some actions for professional development. And having those included. So we got to see a nice illustration of what that looks like, how it can visually guide us when we add those dates for those action steps as well. Or are you ready for teachers to take that goal evidence and use it as a reflective space? So instead of just providing a description, can they also use this as an opportunity to reflect on their current practice and where they're at? Or E, are you ready to start using those comments in the student portfolio to communicate growth targets? Here's where I'm expecting my students to go. And then you have a much clearer picture of where they are in relationship to that. So we'd love to hear, are any of these consider this topics, things that you're ready to get started on now? Which one are you closest to or maybe already put in action? So go ahead and let us know in the chat. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go into our next topic on how do we manage all of these details.
Okay, so one of the latest features that we have released is our overview page. And it's kind of a landing page. So if you have, and we've talked about this, being intentional with your setup. So if you are using and setting up your evaluation process for success, this is going to be huge in helping to keep you on track, monitoring your process, and it lets you know if something needs attention. So the biggest thing, this, and I think we're probably past the window for this, but if you're having student growth goals, if that's a part of your process, or if there's any kind of observation targets or whatever you have set up, this is a great way to keep you focused on monitoring that for your campus and for your appraisees. And then the next part of it, if you have action that you need to take, this actually gives this to you in one place. So instead of having to kind of see, oh, I need to check this or I need to check that, this is all in one place. These are the tasks that you need to take care of. You might have a goal that you need to approve. You might have a teacher that hasn't turned a goal in yet, or you might need to let staff view, like let's say you did an observation and you forgot to click the button to let the staff view because you were still working on it. So these are just some tools that if you have your evaluation process set up, that are going to help you stay on top of that, monitoring and making sure that you're taking care of anything that needs your attention. And Paige, I think, is going to talk about some reports.
Tara, can I get you to go back one just to that last slide? I want to mention one thing that's not visible in this screenshot, but if you do click on the remind appraisee, if it's something that they need to do next, but it's kind of at a standstill, when you click on that button, you will get a place where you can click and email them right there and not have to leave and go somewhere else to notify them. So that makes it really easy for you to keep up with those tasks and remind the appraisees, or do the thing that you need to do, whether it's approve or click the let staff view button. Okay, thank you. So another way that you can kind of manage the details and stay on track with the process is to monitor things through reports. And especially at the beginning of the year, there are two reports that I think are very helpful. We have a link in this PowerPoint presentation, which you'll be getting at the end, to a place in our online help guide. The article is called Getting Started with Strive Reports, and it has the table, as you can see, that lists suggested run times for reports and what the purpose of that report is. So if you're trying to figure out how to do something, this is a good place to come in our online help guide, read those purpose statements. What is the report good for? If you find the report that sounds like it's going to meet your needs, then in the left-hand column, those are all links to directions for that specific report. A couple that are helpful at the beginning of the year are the goal summary spreadsheet export, which is, and I think that's the next slide, Tara. The goal summary spreadsheet export is a very down and dirty report. It's a spreadsheet. It has columns for unsubmitted, submitted, approved, completed, and archived for those goals. And so you can run that report and see if your teachers have started writing goals, but they're still in the unsubmitted column. When you have that goal deadline, did they meet that and move them into the submitted column by the deadline that you set? And then as an appraiser, I would want to go in a week or so after that deadline to make sure that I got them all approved, because we want them to be in the approved state for the majority of the year. And then toward the end of the year, before they come to summatives, are those teachers going in, evaluating their work and deciding, yes, I think I have completed my goal, I'm going to mark it complete. So you can just monitor the progress of the goals through that spreadsheet. The other report that's helpful at the beginning of the year is the goal detail spreadsheet. And it has all of the information about status, but it has the entire goal in there. So I can see my whole staff and I can see all the goals that they wrote, the success criteria that they put in there. I can see what standards they're working on. You can run both of these reports, the goals summary and the goals detail, for professional goals or for student growth goals. In this example, I showed the student growth goal because I'm adding a little tip in here. This is another consider this kind of thing. Once you run that report, you could filter down for just those teachers that you are responsible for. So if you look in the appraiser's name column, you'll see it's all one appraiser. So I've narrowed it down to just the teachers that I'm the official appraiser of record. And then I've added a column into this report. I added it right next to the goal statement. You can add it wherever you want to, but because I had my teachers put in their grade level and subject area in their goal statement, I can then add in the class periods from the master schedule that align with that goal statement that they wrote. So it's sort of my cheat sheet for when I can do those observations. I know I need to observe them during the time when they are teaching the subject and grade level of their goal. So I have those identified here, and that's going to keep me on track with only scheduling those formal observations and some walkthroughs during that time when they're teaching the subject area and grade level that I'm interested in. So that's a way that you can use that report to kind of help you stay on track and kind of manage some of the details. It's also going to help you see all of the different goals that are being written, and you can use that for coaching purposes as well. When I'm looking at all those statements, can I group some of these teachers together and create some coaching groups based on the goals that they're working on? Okay, Shanna's going to talk next about the analysis pieces.
Yeah, so we're playing tag team today, so this is fun. So another tool that is really powerful is the document summary analysis. For me, I think this is one of the most important ones. It's so informative. It's probably the most informative coaching tool you have, because you're able to be very intentional with your walkthroughs, and you get some very, very good information back. You're able to like define a coaching focus, you're developing future training opportunities, and you're just making sure you have a really clear picture of what's going on in your classroom. So I love this tool just for being able to identify trends in your document summary and just making decisions of where you really need to focus. So I love the document summary for that purpose. Now, the next one is the appraisal analysis. And this is where you're going to get more detailed information. This is going to be beneficial for you as far as calibration. So calibrating your appraisers, that is where you want to make sure that all of the appraisers are, when they walk into a classroom, they have the same understanding about the rubric. So this is kind of where you would do, like you might run a report to see if there is anybody that stands out that you might need to go and talk to and say, okay, maybe we need to make sure we're calibrated, make sure everybody understands the same level. So this is really good tool for that. So again, two of my favorite. I love all of the analysis tools that we've put out in Strive. I just think they're all super beneficial for kind of evaluating your entire process. So that's it.
Love that. So now we're going to transition into some strategies, some ways that you can think about some of the information that's been presented. We know we have covered a lot of different details, and they may or may not all be present in your current system. So we want to, be mindful of sometimes we have to grow into these practices. So we've been talking about ways that we can measure growth. Some of that growth is happening with us at the leadership level, and what are the expectations we're setting? How can we drive these practices over time? So notice here in this chart, we have periods because this is open to what amount of time it might take for you locally to make some of these transitions. So assuming this year you're working on student growth goals, you have them submitted, you've gone through the approval process with them, what might be the next thing that you can do to enhance this area of the growth measurements that you're taking? So we can kind of stair step this out. We can, within Strive, continue to collect that intentional evidence. So Paige gave us some ideas for that in the Consider This section. So if this is not something you're already doing, think about when can we start doing this? How do we need to prepare others so that we're getting the type of evidence that truly shows us that we've made progress on the goal? Now, as that becomes part of your routine practice, maybe the next step is to be really targeted with data conversations that are about your curriculum. So what are some things in forethought that we can use to enhance our data conversations? We're going into classrooms, we're seeing the curriculum that's being taught. We see our student growth goals that are also connected to these standards. How can we continue to shape these conversations so that they look and sound similar, but our teachers are bringing us the content based on their strengths and their areas of need to help us refine with them? And then finally, maybe a step for you is to connect all of these actions with some opportunities in Aware. And now you have really solid foundation. Teachers are understanding their curriculum. They're applying it to a student growth goal appropriately. Let's enhance that data collection with some observations in our student portfolios. So again, reflecting back to Paige's Consider This conversation, we were able to use the comments to put in the target that we're trying to reach. So this is another way to really enhance your practices. So I want to encourage you, take stock of where you're at. What do you have in action? Are these things complementary of one another? Do we understand how they work together? Or do we need to kind of pause for a moment and redefine a few things and figure out what is that next step that will help us to move forward? So just wanted to kind of frame some ideas of thinking about what you're currently doing, how you can enhance it, and defining what those periods of time look like for you. So for some of us, this might be, we do this in quarters. Maybe some of this is we do period 1 and period 2 this year. Next year, we focus on the next 2 periods of time, whatever this looks like, so that you can do it successfully and with reflection so that you can enhance your practices. So hope this gives you some ways of breaking it down and structuring where to go next with a lot of this information that you're hearing this afternoon.
And that was a great big picture overview of the different elements to manage as part of the process. Within each part of that, there are, it's good to take some time and reflect as well. So what are your steps and tasks and templates that you're using as part of your process, and are they up to date? Is your current process working for you? Are there pain points for the appraisers? Because you're hearing from it if there are. Do the templates that you're using still meet your needs, or do you need to make some changes to those? You can go in and make changes to the process pretty much at any time. There are some considerations. If you're editing a template, you don't want to reorder anything in a template during a collection because that will impact your data. So there are some edits that are okay to make, mid-year. Some edits, I would say, let's wait until after the end of the year and do that for next year. But you can be looking at those things at any point in time. With steps and tasks in your process, those can be changed at any time. You won't lose any of the documents. If you remove a document from your process, the ones that were created prior to that change will still be there. So you can do some changes as you're going through the year. And then we do always recommend doing an evaluation at the end of the year to make any changes going forward. In the bottom left-hand corner of this slide, there's a link to a setup checklist that kind of goes through lots of things to think about with your process. Everything from frameworks to templates to due dates is all in there. And so you'll have access to that. We recommend taking a look at that at multiple times through the year to make sure that you're staying on top of the process. And as you're considering any changes, don't forget about the Eduforia community, because we do put out templates in the community. If it has an asterisk at the beginning of it, either 1 or 2, that means, or should mean, we have some people who've named them with asterisks, but we try to keep it where those are the ones that came from Eduforia, so that you'll know that that's one we put out there. When we hear of something that's different, that's new from the state, we try to create a template that will be out there and easy for you to use, so that you can, click on the import button, bring it into your system, and put it into practice right away. Other districts have also shared some really great templates, and they're out there as well. And speaking of from the community, in February of last year, TEA published a new teacher rating rubric that is part of the summative document. And so we created a new summative. It's in the community now. The name is listed there for you. It's a mouthful because we wanted to include the due date so that you would know it was the one that meets what they approved last February. But you can go out and get that summative now. Most likely, no summatives have been done in your district at this point in time. You can do a quick check by running the document summary report on summatives, and it will show you if there are any in there or not. Most likely it's going to come back and say no data at this time. So this would be a good time to go ahead and make that update to the newly published rubric for the teacher rating section. This is just at the bottom after all the other domains and dimensions are covered. This is that 5th domain or 17th dimension, depending on whether or not you're scoring. The rubric itself is not hugely different. They clarified the language some from the 2017 version, and they did clarify the student part of that to make it a little more appropriate for the different ratings. So that's the new language, and that template is out there and ready for you to use. And we do try to keep templates out there as we hear of things like this that make it easy for you to just drop that